Draft grades are pointless. Well, not necessarily pointless, but they are if they're done immediately after that draft. If you wait a couple of years and you watch the guys play on the field, that's a better way to assess what they've actually brought to the table. So let's do that today on today's show, looking back at the 2021 Carolina Panthers draft class and seeing just how good they actually did.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays I answer your weekly Friday mailbag questions either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council to get your questions in for this week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So, every year after the draft, you look at ESPN, Pro Football Focus, CBS Sports, Yahoo, Bleacher Report, you name it, and they put out draft grades. That is an extremely useless exercise, in my opinion. We have no idea, actually, how well these guys are going to perform once they get into the league. You can love Caleb Williams and what he might do for the Bears. You can love Xavier Legette and what he could do here in Carolina, but we don't know how it's actually going to work out for those individuals and their individual teams and stops along the way. We do know in a couple years' time, 3 years, in my opinion, whether that was actually an A pick or a B or a C, a D, or even an F. So on today's show, I want to look back at the Panthers draft class 3 years ago, go pick by pick, player by player, give my grade of that individual player, look at where he stands heading into the 2024 season, and look at the class as a whole and compare it to the other classes of recent memory here in Carolina to see how it stacks up and whether the Panthers are in the right spot moving forward to build with some of the guys that were drafted in 2021. So let's revisit the Carolina Panthers 2021 NFL draft class. Scott Fitterer, by the way, he was the general manager back then in 2021. He is no longer here in Carolina, and we'll go over on this show a big reason why he's no longer here in Carolina. Although there were some solid picks that he made on that night where he traded 4 times during that draft, came away with 11 players, a massive draft haul for the Carolina Panthers, and did something we hadn't really seen a general manager do in the past here in Carolina. Never really saw Marty Hurney do this on draft night or saw Dave Gettleman do this in draft night, where Scott Fitterer was wheeling, dealing, and finding a way to go into the draft with only 6 picks and come out with 11 picks, and he certainly should have been commended for doing that, which he was, and even to this day, I commend it. Now, do I commend the job that he did with the guys that he took? We'll get to that here on the show. Starting off with that first round pick, the Panthers had a decision to make. Did they want to get a quarterback, Justin Fields potentially? Did they want to get Mac Jones, or were they going to go with the defensive player? They decided with the entire defensive board at their disposal, they decided to take J.C. Horn, the cornerback out of South Carolina. And J.C., when healthy, as we all know, is an excellent player. And I hate that the rest of the league doesn't know this, because JC has missed 29 out of a possible 51 games in his first 3 years of his career. The first 2 games, he was outstanding against the Jets, against the Saints, then goes down in that third quarter on the road against Houston, was out for the rest of the season, comes back the next season, plays well again, misses some time because of a rib injury, then friendly fire, Jeremy Chin breaking his wrist. He has not played in the all-important de facto NFC South title game against Tampa Bay. Then last year, second quarter, week 1, on the road against Atlanta, pops his hamstring, and that was the majority of the season right there, gone. So we have not gotten to see JC. But the Panthers, they've seen enough JC Horn, and they look at the rest of their cornerback room, and they want to invest in him at least past this season for one more year in 2025, as they have exercised a 5th-year option. And according to Over the Cap, that is projected to be $12.4 million in 2025. Now, how they decided to not pick it up if JC would have stayed healthy, played well at a Pro Bowl level, which I think he can play at if he actually plays a 17-game schedule, maybe even 15 games, 16 games. I'll take anything around there, and he would be a Pro Bowler when healthy. The Panthers would have had to pay him around $18-19 million if they had to do the whole franchise tag deal, but they're going to take a risk, and I think it's one worth taking because this is a very good player. So I give J.C. Horn a B+ because he's good, hasn't been available, but the team has still invested in him. It's not like he's a complete bust. Patrick Surtain has, yes, been a better player. He's been available, and that's been the big part of him being a better player. JC has not been available, has not been better than Surtain, even when he's been out on the field. I still would give this a B+, going to look on the positive side of this. The only negative, really, is the fact that he has not played in enough games. Looking at their second-round draft pick, they took Terrace Marshall Jr., 59th overall, out of LSU, and TMJ has not had the career that a lot of us were hoping. Looking at his career receptions, yardage, and touchdowns, 64 career receptions, 767 yards, and you would take that for a single season. But unfortunately, that is 3 seasons combined so far and only 1 touchdown. The best stretch of his career came back in the final 11 games of the 2022 season, where he had 24 receptions, 460 yards, and a touchdown in that Bengals game where the Panthers got blown out. But he became the number 2 wide receiver opposite of DJ Moore and that Panthers offense that went more as a ground and pound downhill rushing attack when Steve Wilkes took over as the interim head coach, and had a lot of people seeing the potential in Terrace Marshall and thinking that this may be a guy for the future who can tag team with DJ. Unfortunately, DJ Moore gets traded at the upcoming offseason. Terrace Marshall then gets replaced immediately by Frank Reich's staff as they drafted Jonathan Mingo, also a second-round pick 39 in that year's draft. And at times, they forgot Terrace Marshall even existed. How do I say that? Because back after he had a career-high 9 receptions against Minnesota, only for 56 yards, but a career-high 9 receptions the next week in a loss against Detroit, he did not play, was active, did not play. Frank Reich was asked about it, and he said, I that's on me. I messed that up. And right then and there, at 0-5, after a player had a career day, not a ton of yardage, but reception-wise, you didn't have that guy part of your game plan. We should have known right then and there, and I'm sure plenty of you were already calling for his head anyways, that Frank Reich was not the man for the job here in Carolina. Terrace would go on to be inactive for 7 weeks in 2023 in the second half of the season before being active in Week 18, and this was the final straw for me. Versus Tampa, he lines up in an illegal formation, penalty, brings back a touchdown where Bryce Young's able to get out of the pocket, throw it to the sideline. One of the best offensive plays we had seen all season long, in a season devoid of good offensive plays, was brought back because Terrace Marshall could not line up properly. Fundamental things, which is why this is a D. Not going to give him an F, but a D, because we did see promise. You can question whether Wilkes would have came back if Terrace has a bigger role. Frank Reich forgot about him, but I see why he forgot about him. The man can't even line up properly. That is inexcusable. Looking at their pick in the 3rd round, the first one the Panthers made back in 2021. Brady Christensen taken 70th overall out of BYU was a big reason why Zach Wilson had that major season against the Sisters of the Poor, as BYU did not play a lot of the Pac-12 opponents, RIP, that they typically play because of the pandemic season. Zach Wilson went on to be the number 2 overall pick in this draft, and he is no longer in New York. So Brady Christensen got Zach Wilson paid, and he came to Carolina, and he got some opportunities his rookie year, played in 16 games, started in 6 of them. He played every position except for center that year, as the Panthers had a litany of injuries in 2022. He started every game at left guard. He was a part of a solid pairing with Ike Ekwonu there on the left side. Also, you had Bradley Bozeman when he came in once Pat Elflein went out for the season with a hip injury. Taylor Moton was there. Austin Corbett was there. A solid offensive line, but he was the lowest grade according to Pro Football Focus on that O-line at that left guard spot, which called into question whether the Panthers could potentially upgrade there in the future. Last year started at left guard against Atlanta, tore his bicep in that game, was out for the rest of the season. And now heading into 2024, he is the backup center and also probably the backup left guard. So a player who can play really all 5 positions, which is a positive, doesn't have a true home, probably more of a tackle than he is an interior offensive lineman. Didn't really get that opportunity here in Carolina. Never going to get that opportunity, it seems like, in Carolina. Maybe elsewhere in the NFL, someone will look for him. not a great situation for Brady to be in, as he's going to be a free agent after the season. Don't imagine Carolina's going to want to bring him back. Where is his home on the offensive line? Another team can try to find it. He has experience starting, which is a positive for him, but it's not so certain whether he's a center, a guard, or a tackle, and that's after 3 years. So we'll see how it pans out for him this year, as he's going to be a backup, potentially could be a swing tackle. Josh Nijman's been brought in to do that, but still, Brady Christensen has a role to play here in Carolina, and that role is as a backup, either the 6th or 7th offensive lineman here in Carolina heading into 2024. And I give that grade a C+. He started, but wasn't the best starter for the Carolina Panthers. He is versatile. That is good. But his role heading into the season is backup, and he's probably not going to be here after this year. So those are the first 3 picks Panthers made in 2021. Let's look at the last 8 picks that they made here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. When it comes to your financial future, you think you've done it all. You've saved, you've researched, you've invested all that you can. Now you need to take those investments to the next level by using what every financial great uses, Yahoo Finance. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or looking for the extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. They are the #1 finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. Securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it's how Yahoo Finance ensures you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, the #1 financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. Let's look at the other 8 picks the Panthers selected in the 2021 draft, as we're revisiting the 2021 draft class and giving the grades to those draft picks. As 3 years ago, you saw the grades. You probably got excited about the grades, excited about everything that Scott Fitterer did, and rightfully so. It's a draft. Gives you hope, but you don't really know how it's actually going to pan out until about 3 years down the road, when you see these guys heading to the final year of their rookie deal and see what their future is going to be with your favorite team. And that team is, of course, Carolina Panthers. Looking later on in the 3rd round, pick 83, Tommy Tremble, tight end out of Notre Dame. So far, Tommy has, I feel like, done everything that you could have reasonably expected out of him coming out of Notre Dame. He's played in 49 out of 51 games, started in 23 of them. He has 62 receptions, 548 yards, and 7 touchdowns in his career. He came in as a blocking tight end. The hope was that one day he could be more than just a blocking tight end, that could be an actual threat in the passing game. And up until this point, I don't think we're quite there yet. But go back to last year during OTAs, a big reason why you shouldn't take too much of what's going on in OTAs that seriously. He talked about how this is the first time in my career that they've actually coached tight ends how to run routes and be part of the offense. And then we got to last year, and while everything was jacked up, the tight end group was no better than what we had seen under Joe Brady and Matt Rule and all the other play callers and coaches we had seen prior to Frank Reich coming here during Tommy Tremble's career. So I still think Tommy is a good player as far as being a blocking tight end. I think that he does give you some upside as a pass catcher, as we saw in the latter half of last season. But the Panthers, they drafted Jatavion Sanders out of Texas for a reason, because they looked at the rest of their tight end group, realized these guys aren't really what we need in the passing game as far as being a threat and being a net positive. So let's bring in somebody else. Either way, I feel like Tommy Tremble has been a solid draft pick. I think he's somebody that should have a future here in Carolina. It's not guaranteed, but I would like to see him return, especially if he has another solid season this year and continues to grow as a pass catcher at that tight end position. But a 3rd round pick is a starter, not a plus starter. I'll give this pick a B, which I think is a fair grade. In the 4th round to begin that day, the Carolina Panthers took Chuba Hubbard. Really, it was Julie Rule, Matt Rule's wife, who decided that that's the player the Panthers should get, because he ran all over Nebraska. Not Nebraska, that's where Rule's at now, but he ran all over Baylor back when Matt Rule's the head coach, when Chuba Hubbard was there at Oklahoma State, had a 2,000-yard rushing season that year, and Julie Rule said, we got to get that guy here. And maybe one of the best picks that was made by Matt Rule and his wife during the draft that year. He has 1,980 yards rushing and 12 touchdowns through his first 3 years of his career. Last season had a career high 902 rushing yards. He had to step up in 2021 for Christian McCaffrey when CMC went down with that hamstring injury. In that same game, J.C. Horn broke his foot, that Thursday night game on the road against Houston. It was okay in that backup role or in that starting role in 2021 and in 2022 when CMC was traded. He became part of a solid pairing with Deontay Foreman, where Foreman really was the lead back, and Chuba also had his moments. And last year, finally had the opportunity to be the guy after Miles Sanders struggled with a groin injury and just really didn't show what that coaching staff was hoping they were going to get out of him. And Chuba became the guy down the stretch and for the majority of the season as he rushed for a career high 902 rushing yards. Heading into this year, Chuba is going to be RB1 to start off. I don't think that they traded up in the second round to get Jonathan Brooks for Jonathan Brooks to not eventually be the guy at some point this season. So I think when fully healthy, which may not be right out the gate, it's probably going to be sometime during the season as Jonathan Brooks has got to get used to cutting, has to get used to just the mental side of things coming off of that injury and the speed of the game in the NFL after having a significant injuries last year in college. And he also has not played that many snaps as a running back, which is a benefit, but also could be in a way a negative heading into the league. I think Chuba is still going to be the top guy starting out, but eventually I do think that it will be Jonathan Brooks who takes over. But I do think Chuba Hubbard has an opportunity to put up similar numbers that he put up last year because Dave Canales has talked about how much that they want to run the ball this upcoming season and that Chuba should still have a solid role as a 1A, 1B kind of back in this Dave Canales offense. So looking at that grade, looking at his grade as far as the pick, I give it a B+. Got a 4th round running back who's a starter for you now and not going to be your long-term starter, of course, which is totally fine, especially at the running back position. But he's been a pretty good player for you. Struggled with returning the football and catching it. But as far as just being a runner, Chuba Hubbard, been a solid player. I'll give that a B+. So they did better in later part of the 3rd round and the beginning of the 4th round with those picks. Now it's where it got ugly for Scott Fitter, Matt Rule, and of course, Julia Rule and company in 2021. 5th round, pick 158, Davion Nixon, defensive tackle out of Iowa, was the Big Ten Player of the Year during the pandemic 2020 season, where the Big Ten only played in, I believe, it was 6 games that season. So not a large sample size, but still played well in what is a premier conference in college football. Coming to Carolina, he only played in 7 games as a rookie before suffering a season-ending knee injury. Then in 2022, did not make the initial roster, but did come back as a practice squad player, then was back on the active roster, played in 7 more games, 15 career tackles as a Carolina Panther, and do not believe he's in the league right now. The hope was the Panthers were going to get interior defensive linemen who could provide pressure up the middle. And that is not what they got. They were hoping to get maybe another Kawan Short. That is not how things panned out. And maybe that's just fans and myself having unrealistic expectations in this situation. Maybe, but I'm giving this a D-. Didn't help you at all. Was injured, didn't make the roster, even when the staff and the coach and the general manager who drafted him were still here. That's never a good sign. Davion Nixon, D-, for me. Later on in the 5th round, 8 picks later, at pick 166, the Panthers took Keith Taylor, corner out of Washington. And Keith, he did play more than Nixon did, and more than some of the guys we've been mentioned so far on the show. And in his class, he played in all 34 games that he spent in those 2 seasons in Carolina, starting 5 times, including some starts late in the season, like that game against the Bucs where he got torched alongside his buddy CJ Henderson as JC Horn was out for that game. That was not ideal. He was a liability in the back end. 129.0 passer rating allowed back in 2022. He was waived by Frank Reich's staff last year, and you understand why. He just wasn't up to snuff, and it is a positive that they were able to get 2 full seasons out of him as a backup and that he did play decent amount of snaps. Just when he did play, he wasn't very good. He's no longer here. And also, I don't believe is on an NFL roster. Gonna have to give this one, unfortunately, another D-. Deontay Brown, 6th round, 193 offensive guard out of Alabama. He only played in 3 games as a Carolina Panther, was waived twice in 2022 and in 2023. Had an injury in 2021 as a rookie that kept him out for a period of time, but still wasn't getting any burn. Primarily spent time as a practice squad guy. Each time he was waived, he was later signed back to the practice squad, but did not play in a game in 22 or in 23. Fans of the Panthers love to complain about a player the Panthers took later on in the 6th round instead of Trey Smith. But the player they should really be looking at and question why on earth did Scott Fitter and Matt Rule and Julia Rule and company take Deontay Brown over Trey Smith, who's gone on to be an excellent offensive guard for the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, Trey Smith did have blood clot issues that kept him out of a lot of games at Tennessee, and that was a serious concern heading into the NFL draft, which is the only reason why he fell all the way back to the 6th round. And I'm sure many of you have never heard that before, and you just decided to yell on Twitter instead of actually doing research to why this player who was a 5-star coming out of high school and played well at Tennessee fell so far back in the draft. Well, that's why. The true crime, if you even want to call it a crime, because there were some legitimate health concerns there, the true crime there in the 6th round is the Panthers took Deontay Brown, not Trey Smith there at pick 193. So, yeah, I'm giving that one an F. Let me take one more pause and come back and talk about the final 3 players of that draft class and give an overall grade on the class and looking at the guys who are still here and wondering what they could do for the Panthers in 2024 here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. And we finally have a schedule. I know a lot of you are planning to make some of those road trips. Tickets are on sale. Go over to Game Time and get your tickets right now. Or if you want to wait for those great deals, you can do it later on this fall. I won't blame you. Just go ahead and use Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. It's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. With 8 picks down, the Panthers still had 3 more picks left in the 2021 NFL Draft. In the 6th round, pick 204, Carolina took Shi Smith, wide receiver out of South Carolina. Shi went on to play 23 games in Carolina, 22 receptions in that 2022 season, where he won the wide receiver 3 job out of camp, had 296 yards receiving that year, 2 touchdowns, and really struggled with drops. And we saw that in that Giants game on the road with the Carolina Panthers. Started off 0-2, and all the calls for Matt Rule's head were coming after that game. Players got to execute. Shi Smith did not execute, looked good in the preseason, had that connection with Baker Mayfield, and that did not carry over to the regular season. Last year was waived by Frank Reich's coaching staff. Not a huge surprise that they're going to move on from a 2nd-round pick in Terrace Marshall, who they didn't cut. They kept him, but they're going to bring in as an immediate replacement. Not a surprise that Shi Smith was going to be one of the odd men out here in Carolina, and that was the case. Also had a weird legal issue off the field that didn't really make a lot of sense, so there was that as well. C-. I didn't give a C- because 6th-round pick, won a job at a camp, kind of contributed, but didn't really, probably really a D, but I'll be nice here. I'll give him a C-. Oh boy, this is the one that I still to this day, I understand kind of why you'd want to try it, but I've just never heard of this being a position that people are willing to use a draft pick on. 6th round, pick 222, Thomas Fletcher, long snapper, Alabama. National long snapper of the year during that national championship season in 2020. Big old asterisk, really good players that came out of that Bama team. But come on, pandemic 2020 asterisk national championship for the Crimson Tide under Nick Saban. Thomas Fletcher was a big part of it. Best at his position. And Matt Rule looked at J.J. Jansen like he looked at Cam Newton, like he looked at a lot of the older players that he inherited in Carolina and said, buddy, your time is up. And what did he do? He called up Thomas Fletcher, told him, hey, bud, you're coming to Carolina. And Thomas Fletcher's like, no, I don't know about that yet, man. I'm still talking to some other teams. Like, no. We're drafting you. And Thomas Fletcher's like, bro, no way. You want to draft me a long snapper? That's insane. What kind of, can't say it, what kind of person would do that? Well, the kind of person who would do that is Matt Rule and Scott Fitterer, who are no longer here in Carolina. This is an F-. This is not the player to be upset about when it comes to Trey Smith. Deontay Brown is the one, but still egregious that they decided that let's use a draft pick, albeit in a sixth round, late sixth round, on a long snapper, who then was terrible at it, and J.J. Jansen is still here. Again, J.J. Jansen forever. Finally, in the seventh round, pick 232, Phil Hoskins, defensive tackle out of Kentucky. He ended up only playing 8 games for Carolina, was waived and later signed by the Chiefs, went on to get a Super Bowl ring. Congratulations to him. Played a little bit last year in Arizona. It's going to sound weird, but the fact that he's been able to leave Carolina, be on another roster, even play in some other games for another team like Arizona, because he didn't play for Kansas City. He was just there, got the ring. But he played last year for a time in Arizona. I'm going to give this like a C-. Again, just being nice. But a 7th round pick who's been able to stick around so far in the league, where some of these other guys who are drafted higher didn't even do as much and are no longer around. Why not? I'll give it that. So looking at the class as a whole, it was pretty bad. There are some guys at the top of it who are still around, who have an opportunity, like JC and like Ian and even Chuba Hubbard as well, because he was not Ian, but I'm sorry, Tommy Trimble. But like JC Horn, Tommy Trimble, and Chuba Hubbard, all 3 of those guys should be significant contributors on offense this year. Whether their numbers are big or not, they're going to play a significant amount of snaps. Well, I guess JC doesn't play offense, but they're going to be guys who are significant contributors on the team this year in Carolina, which is a good thing. That's only 3 out of the 11 draft picks. And looking even down the road, JC's under contract, but will those other guys be under contract? JC's the only one slated to be here after the season, as he has a 5th-year option. But beyond that, we're not quite sure what the future holds. Now, if he plays well this time next season, we could be talking about him already having an extension. Tommy Trimble, looking at him and Chuba, he's the one I would think that would have a really good chance to come back because he plays tight end. He's a good blocker. I do think that he's a good player and should have a future here in Carolina if he wants one. And if they want him to have one, he has to play well under this new coaching staff, of course. But I feel like he's a player that's worth keeping around at the right price. After that, you know how I feel about running backs. Chuba could run for 3,000 yards. I'm going to say, let's get rid of him. Now, if he runs for 3,000 yards, then yeah, you probably need to consider keeping Chuba Hubbard around. They brought in Jonathan Brooks for a reason. They talk about versatility for a reason. We've seen Chuba Hubbard. The hands have gotten better. Still, he's not the kind of back that Dave Canales appears to be looking for. And why do I feel that way? They drafted Jonathan Brooks and talked about versatility. So that's probably 2 out of the 11 players from this draft class that will be getting a second contract. 1 for sure. And that might even be a second contract. Like, that's a 5th-year option. That's still his rookie deal. So it may be 1 for 11 still, and that 1 could be Tommy Trimble. But let's just say it's 2 for 11. That's pretty putrid numbers for Carolina to get 2 players and to bring in 11 players, only 2 of them be able to stick around past your rookie deals. Now, one of them, it's not quite certain that's going to be the case just yet, but he's at least been given the 5th-year option, which is a step in the right direction. And in Tommy Trimble, I feel like he's going to get there. So 2 out of 11, but really right now 0 out of 11 have been given that deal. And it is going into their final year. They didn't have to make any sort of extension offers to these guys just yet outside the 5th-year option. But still, I feel like you understand my point. We're looking at 2 out of 11 players from that draft class getting a second contract in Carolina. Comparing that to the classes before them, in 2020, Derek Brown is the only player who got a second contract and is still here in Carolina. There were 7 players picked, all on defense, but 1 out of 7. Brian Burns would have gotten a second contract potentially, but that did not work out in Carolina. So 0 out of the 7 players that were selected in 2019 are still on the roster. 2018 was the last time the Panthers had a class where multiple players signed a second contract here in Carolina. DJ Moore, who was later then traded to the Bears, Dante Jackson, who was later then traded to the Steelers, Ian Thomas, who's still here, and then Marquise Haynes, who's now not here in Carolina, and I don't believe is on any roster right now. The lone guy to stick around from that 2018 class is Ian Thomas. That kind of tells you everything you need to know about where the Carolina Panthers are right now, coming off a 2-15 season. They must draft better. If this franchise wants to have any sustained success, but wants to head into the right direction, even temporarily, they have to draft better. 2 out of 11 players getting second contracts, 1 out of 7, 0 out of 7. That's not good enough. And then the guys that you do bring back, you trade them away. Now, DJ, that one, didn't like it at all. Dante makes sense. Ian being around, okay, that's a good thing. Marquise, maybe he's still around had he not had the back injury last year, but still, they got to be better drafting. And that's part of the reason why I want to do this exercise, to go through that draft class and to really look back at it and to see where these guys are now and where the team is currently and potentially headed. Like, overall, my grade for the 2021 draft class is a D+. The only reason it's a plus is because JC Horn exists. And I think when healthy, as we've all seen, he's someone the Panthers will keep around. And I also think Tommy Trimble has a good chance to stay around. And maybe because this coaching staff and front office value running backs, Chuba Hubbard may get to stick around as well. So potentially 3 out of 11, but more likely 2 out of 11 of those guys drafted will stick around. That ain't good enough. That's not going to cut it. And of course, you can look at all the other teams in the league and try to compare and contrast. But historically, at least of recent memory, the Panthers have not done a good job of drafting their players, then signing them to a second contract because they earned that second contract. That's alarming and must be better for them to get to where we want them to get, and that is atop the NFC South and consistently being a playoff contender in back-to-back double-digit win seasons. Is that too much to ask? So there is the 2021 draft class, and if you didn't already know, now you know why David Tepper and everyone there made that decision back in January to say, Scott Fitter, here's your pink slip. Please get out. All right, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays throughout the offseason, I answer your weekly Friday mailbag questions. So either at me or DM me to get those questions into me right now. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding, and I'll talk to y'all on Friday.